The fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan intensified among the platforms and suspension bridges of Mustafar. The scorching heat reflected the internal conflict of both. Near the landing platform of Padme's ship, Obi-Wan tried to gain an advantage by using the terrain, but Anakin, overcome with rage, used the Force to tear blocks of rock from the edge of the cliffs. He held them suspended in the air, creating makeshift, unstable walkways that prevented Obi-Wan from retreating or repositioning himself safely. The stones spun and swayed, forcing his former master to fight on unfamiliar ground, evening the combat. At the height of another rapid exchange of blows, a muffled scream echoed from the direction of the ship. Padme, who had been unconscious until then, writhed in pain. Her body convulsed violently, and the sound of her suffering cut through the air like a blade. Anakin stopped suddenly, his lightsaber still lit, his eyes wide with terror. Obi-Wan hesitated, disappointment and pain still throbbing, but his attention also shifted. Without thinking twice, Anakin ran to the ramp of the ship, Padme's screams echoing through the roar of the lava. Obi-Wan followed, tense, but without his lightsaber in hand. He was also concerned about Padme, and if Anakin would finally listen to reason and stop this madness, he would accompany him. As Anakin knelt beside Padme, trying to calm her, a violent explosion of lava erupted beside the ship. Incandescent fragments flew through the air, and one of them came dangerously close to Anakin and Padme. Obi-Wan, still behind them, acted on instinct and reached out his arm. Using the Force, he threw one of the rocks and created a barrier that deflected the flaming fragment. They looked at each other in silence, panting with the memory of the battle still burning. But the life at risk, Padme and their children, was greater than any grudge. For the first time in a long time, they were united by something stronger than pain. The situation demanded immediate action. Obi-Wan took control of the ship and began takeoff, while Anakin remained at Padme's side, sweating and trembling, picked her up in his arms, and carried her to the ship's treatment room. The atmosphere inside the ship was thick, marked by an unbearable mixture of guilt, love, and despair. Padme, still in the midst of contractions, clutched Anakin's hand tightly, murmuring disconnected words. Obi-Wan, though torn between his oath and his indignation, saw the fragility of everyone there. There were no heroes or villains at that moment. Just three broken people trying to survive the end of the world. In space, the relief of being far from Mustafar was brief. Padme began to bleed and shake. The ship's sensors indicated a drop in pressure and unstable vital signs. Anakin's eyes, once filled with rage, were now filled with tears. Obi-Wan improvised a stretcher and instructed Anakin to keep Padme awake. Time seemed to stretch out. Padme's pain turned into muffled screams, and in that chaos, the contractions intensified. The birth was imminent and premature, but not because Padme had lost the will to live, but because of the shock of seeing Anakin committing all those atrocities and even trying to kill her with the Force. That's why she went into shock and went into labor. Without adequate equipment, without medical droids, all that remained was the Force and faith. But Obi-Wan was there and used all his life experience to help in that moment. He had never delivered a baby before, but he instructed Anakin to hold Padme's hand and pray that the Force acting through his body would pass into hers. Obi-Wan did the same, holding her other hand, and both gave it their all. The first cry echoed through the ship like a pure note of hope. Luke was born covered in blood and heat, wrapped in Anakin's trembling arms. Moments later, Leia came into the world, silent, her eyes half closed, breathing heavily in Obi-Wan's arms. Padme seemed to slowly fade away. Her pale face turned toward her children, but her eyes began to close. Anakin called her name once, twice, 10 times, his voice trembling, desperate. "Stay with me, Padme. Please. You promised. Forgive me. I made a mistake, but I need you. Our children need their mother." It was difficult, and they almost lost hope. But at some point, Anakin's voice reached deep into Padme's consciousness. Then she heard the two children crying and began to respond. Padme's skin regained its color. Her breathing stabilized. And finally, When she heard Anakin's voice whispering, "I still love you," she opened her eyes, slowly but alive. The silence that followed was profound. Luke and Leia slept in makeshift sheets. Anakin watched them with his hands flat on their fragile little bodies. There, surrounded by two pure beings, he felt something he had never experienced before: true peace. Palpatine's influence was slowly fading away like mist in the sun, with every moment Anakin spent with those two children and Padme. The weight of the deaths, the dark side, the lies, everything seemed to lose its power in the light that emanated from his children. Obi-Wan remained silent, respecting the moment, watching as the man who had almost been lost resurfaced. Broken, but whole, Anakin remained kneeling before his children for a long time. He watched their serene expressions, their small hands, the warmth of their bodies. The Force pulsed intensely in them, but without arrogance, without pretension, just light. He caressed Leia's face, then Luke's, feeling as if the wounds of the past were reopening only to heal truly. His eyes sought Padme's, and even though she was weak, she smiled. There was no forgiveness yet, but there was something more important: hope. Obi-Wan walked away, heading for the control cabin, but his mind remained in that moment. He had seen the dark side consume his apprentice, the friend he loved so much. And now he saw that same man break down in tears, with his children in his arms, as if he were touching redemption. Obi-Wan didn't know if he could trust again, but he also couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed. Perhaps the Force still had a greater plan. Perhaps the choice in the fire had not been ruin, but a chance for a new beginning. As the ship glided silently through hyperspace, the universe outside was still at war. The Republic was dead, and the Empire loomed like a colossal shadow. But inside that small ship, amid pain, memories, and the cries of newborns, something new was being born. It wasn't just the birth of Luke and Leia. It was the birth of a promise. Anakin Skywalker did not know what would come next, but at that moment, he decided he would do the impossible to protect that light. For the first time in a long time, he became a Jedi again, not by title but by choice. The ship landed on Alderaan under cover of night, without official authorization, only with the personal permission of Bail Organa. Hidden among mountains covered in blue mist and dense forests, the isolated Organa estate became a temporary refuge for the 4 passengers on the run. Anakin remained silent as he descended the ramp, carrying Padme in his arms, while Obi-Wan held the small children wrapped in cloaks. The mood between the former couple was one of restrained mourning. The galaxy was collapsing, and everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same again, and that Anakin was to blame. The intercepted transmissions confirmed it. The Empire was born, and the Jedi Order was in ruins. Even in hiding, they acted quickly. Obi-Wan and Bail used ancient codes, known only to the oldest masters, to send a coded message to the surviving Jedi. The clones have turned. Retreat. Avoid Republic bases. Gather when it is safe. A fragile hope, but one that echoed through forgotten systems. Days later, whispered news confirmed that some knights had escaped thanks to that warning. The message had come too late for many, but it had saved a few. While Padme recovered from her premature birth injuries, the atmosphere inside the stone house was heavy. Anakin accompanied her every step of the way, helping her walk, eat, and rest. But Padme still carried the weight of fear. Conversations were short, harsh, always on the verge of breaking down. "You lied to me, Anakin, and tried to hurt me. You accused me of things I never did," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was protecting you," he replied. The love was still there, but behind it lay an abyss of mistrust and pain. Padme looked at him as if he had been torn in two, half her husband, half a stranger. Obi-Wan, although present, kept his distance. He spent his days atop the hills watching for approaches and escape routes. At night, he reconfigured ancient signals on a handmade communicator, trying to find signs of Jedi life. In a brief confrontation, he exterminated a group of 3 tracking clones that had come too close to the property, using the Force with precision and silence. As he buried the bodies, He whispered prayers he had learned in his youth at the Temple of Coruscant. "I will not let the dark side consume this family," he murmured among the anonymous graves. For him, Anakin's redemption was possible but fragile, and must be protected at all costs. One afternoon, Anakin sat in the garden behind the house with Luke on his lap. The baby waved his little hands in the air, making disconnected sounds. Anakin smiled genuinely. Leia slept in the crib next to them. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to feel the Force without anger, without fear, without ambition. And it responded. Like a calm stream flowing through his soul, the Force manifested itself in him not as power, but as peace. There, far from the Senate, far from the wars, far from Palpatine, Anakin felt alive, and he felt like a father. He meditated with his children by his side, and with each passing day, another crack in what remained of Darth Vader crumbled away, but he still couldn't interact with Padme. She hadn't forgiven him yet. There was too much hurt, and Anakin understood why. Padme watched him from the balcony, silent, conflicted. Seeing him like this, so serene, was almost painful. She remembered the days on Naboo, when he talked about stars and the future. That night, she went to him. They sat by the fireplace. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Anakin, but I can't hate you. Not when I see how you look at them." He lowered his head and said, "I destroyed everything, except you, and for that I will fight to the end." There was more silence than words, but in that pause, Padme leaned her head on his shoulder, and they both cried, not as lovers, but as survivors. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan was finally able to connect with Yoda through an encrypted channel. The old master's voice sounded muffled, transmitted from a damp cave in Dagobah. "Short time we have. Action we must take." They decided to meet in person. Obi-Wan left Alderaan secretly, traveling through forgotten hyperspace, and found Yoda under an ancient tree, surrounded by mist and wildlife. The conversation between the two was intense. Yoda did not propose waiting. He proposed regrouping those who remained, forming a resistance. The shadow has grown, but hidden light still remains. Jedi, forgotten knights, distant allies. Together, we can raise new hope. Obi-Wan communicated with Anakin through coded messages. Anakin was calmer, more focused, but still mired in guilt. "You are changing," Obi-Wan said, without arrogance. "Not for me," replied Anakin, holding Leia's hand. "For them." Obi-Wan then explained the plan. To gather surviving Jedi, find old allies, and form a secret front against the Empire. Anakin listened silently. When he finished, he stood up and said, "If it's to save what's left, I'll fight." Yoda and Obi-Wan began plotting routes to visit remote systems where rumors of survivors persisted. They knew it would be a long, risky, but essential task. Bail Organa committed resources, transport codes, and old contacts. What had once been an escape now became a mission. The galaxy needed a core of resistance. It needed leaders. It needed hope. And even though the number of Jedi had been decimated, even though the Empire was on the rise, the first step had been taken. Amid forgotten routes and systems on the brink of chaos, Obi-Wan and Yoda traveled in disguise on cargo ships and unmonitored routes, searching for survivors. They passed through frozen mountains, abandoned tunnels, and deserts swept by red sand. On each world, they left coded messages, and little by little, echoes of the old order responded. They rescued Valencor, a silent alien who survived hidden in Sith catacombs. Tara Aelin, a human, former Jedi archaeology master. Chavin, who had survived the extermination. Kodar, a strategist, and Lisu Ven, a psychic who lost her family during Order 66. With each rescue, something more than a team was formed. A new council of hope emerged. Meanwhile, on Alderaan, the routine continued silently and intensely. Anakin spent his days with Luke and Leia, watching their first smiles, first sounds, first conscious glances, but he still trained. He trained with his lightsaber and then meditated, repeating this every day. He trained in the use of the Force and then meditated, repeating everything again. Anakin knew that the day of the final battle was approaching, But inside, the weight was unbearable. He saw his darkness reflected in every moment of tenderness, like a shadow threatening to touch his children. He spent hours staring at the sky, wondering how many deaths could have been avoided if he had made a single different choice. He tried to keep his pain away from Padme, but she felt every crack that still opened in him. She knew that the man before her was broken, but that he wanted to fix everything, not out of pride, but for the sake of their children. On a clear night, when the stars seemed closer, Padme approached him in the garden. She sat silently beside him and only after a long time spoke. "They deserve better, and so do I, but maybe we can rebuild this together." Anakin turned his face toward her, his eyes brimming with tears. "You don't have to forgive me." Padme rested her forehead against his. "But I can try." That night, without haste, without certainty, but with a spark of hope, the two decided that they would fight not only against the Empire, but against the past, for their family. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Palpatine reorganized his dominion with surgical precision. His throne was the very shadow that spread across the galaxy. With Anakin missing and considered a deserter, he reactivated old networks of bounty hunters, reprogrammed armies of separatist droids, and hired mercenaries from the far reaches of Nar Shaddaa. He called them the Eyes of the New Empire and promised untold rewards for any clue to Skywalker's whereabouts. Battles raged across the Outer Rim. Entire systems were subjugated without resistance, and those who resisted were exterminated. But behind the appearance of control, Palpatine missed his most powerful pawn and feared what he might become outside of his influence. After months of searching and risky encounters, Obi-Wan returned with the 5 surviving Jedi. The reunion with Anakin was silent. There were no hugs or words, just a mutual invitation. In a clearing in an Alderaan forest, under the dim light of dusk, the two stood face to face. They turned on their lightsabers and began a sequence of slow, rehearsed movements. It was not a duel, it was a dialogue without words. Each step said, "I remember." Each block said, "I'm still here." Each turn said, "We haven't given up." At the end, they turned off their sabers at the same time. And in that moment, they were no longer master and apprentice. They were equals, brothers in a war they never asked for. At the secret base built in the underground of the Organa estate, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Bail met with the 5 Jedi and rebel leaders from worlds already under threat. They devised a daring plan to attack Coruscant with stealth ships, infiltrate the former diplomatic sector, and access the Senate. The goal was clear: eliminate Palpatine before he completed the consolidation of the Empire and eliminated the last vestiges of freedom. Bail promised access to ships and trade routes. Yoda contacted old allies on Kashyyyk, where Wookiee tribes sent thousands of warriors. Other species joined in: Ewoks from Endor, Reapers from Bardata, and even humans from the mines of Ratatak, who had been threatened with enslavement by the Imperials. For the first time, a real force was taking shape. In the days that followed, the underground base became a vibrant command post. The Jedi trained together, allies arrived in camouflaged ships, and whispers of resistance spread. Anakin walked among them with his children in his arms, receiving looks of doubt, respect, and hope. The night before the mission, Anakin remained silent with Padme in the twins' room. He looked at them as if he wanted to freeze that moment. "I swore I would protect you, and I failed. But now, I swear I will protect them, even if I don't come back." Padme hugged him tightly. "If you come back, we'll be here, waiting." Anakin kissed Luke on the forehead and Leia on the cheek. His tears mingled with Padme's. He slowly pulled away, and in that moment he seemed lighter. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running away from who he was. He was going to meet who he should have been. When the stealth cruisers left Alderaan, their hearts weighed as heavily as dead stars. The rebel fleet split into 3 columns, each with different entry routes into Coruscant. Yoda led the innermost core with the surviving Jedi. Obi-Wan coordinated the ground attack. And Anakin, now part of the last alliance, would follow through the dark corridor of the Senate, where the Empire was born and where it should end. On board, everyone knew they might not return. But they also knew there was no more time to fear. Darkness had reigned for too long. The light was finally marching forward. Hyperspace illuminated the windows of Anakin's ship like a river of promise. Ahead of him lay the final battle. Behind him lay the family he had sworn to protect. And within him lay the Force, no longer as a weapon, but as a guide. The warrior who had been shaped by war now fought for peace. The Jedi who had failed now rose to fight. Not for power, not for revenge, but for love. And this time he would not fight alone. The attack began before dawn in Coruscant. Rebel cruisers emerged from hyperspace via unregistered traffic routes, firing on the orbital defense towers. Wookiee starfighters tore through the skies of the capital, engaging Imperial TIE fighters in chaotic formations. The sky turned into a storm of light and explosions, illuminating the domes of the Senate and the Imperial Palace. Meanwhile, on the streets below, Ewok and human ground troops, mixed with freed nomads, advanced through the city squares. Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin, aboard a small infiltration ship, flew close to the city's ancient sewers, ready for the silent strike that would decide everything. On Alderaan, Padme walked slowly through the children's room, holding a transmitter in her hands, trying to keep in touch with Bail Organa. The war was far away, but its weight was there, in her eyes, in her tight heart. Every sound that came from the communicator seemed like a sentence. She looked at Luke and Leia sleeping side by side, and even with fear dominating her thoughts, she gritted her teeth. She knew that Anakin was out there, not out of bloodlust or revenge, but to give those two a future where they could grow up in peace. "Come back to us, Anakin," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Come back whole." The Jedi group strategy was clear. The Allies would make as much noise as possible, distracting the Empire's attention while the main attack team infiltrated the Senate underground. The old tunnels, created during the Old Republic era, still existed beneath the foundations corrupted by Palpatine. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda advanced through them until they emerged in the side chambers of the Senate. Guards from the dark side, clones with black armor and pupilless eyes, awaited them. Anakin was the first to jump, spinning his saber like lightning. Obi-Wan followed, stopping two enemies with a clean move. Yoda, on Anakin's shoulders, leaped into the air with fierce agility and took down three at once with his spinning saber. Outside, the rescued Jedi and their new allies faced the second major objective of the mission: to disable the mind control devices of the remaining clones. Chavin and Li Su-ven led teams that stormed communication towers and blocked the neural signals transmitted by the Empire. Some clones, upon being freed, threw their weapons to the ground and joined the battle. Others, confused, fled. The scenario of oppression began to crumble before the united force of those who refused to be controlled. Entire cities began to react. Signs of revolt appeared on Naboo, Corellia, Sullust. The tide was turning. Inside the Senate, Palpatine awaited them. Seated on his dark throne, his eyes flashed with anger and pleasure. "Have you come to seal your own doom?" he sneered, before raising his hands and unleashing a whirlwind of energy. Anakin rolled to the side. Obi-Wan raised his saber to absorb the impact. Yoda advanced. The combat began violently. Anakin delivered a diagonal cut, blocked by Sidious. Obi-Wan attacked from above. Sidious deflected with the Force. Yoda used a sideways thrust to cut at the Emperor's legs, but was repelled. Sidious threw the entire Senate dome at them with a gesture. Obi-Wan leaped over the debris, attacking with two spins. Anakin slid underneath and struck Sidious's shoulder, but the Sith spun around and knocked him down with a direct lightning strike to the chest. Palpatine roared, his robes in flames, his eyes burning with hatred. He fired another wave of lightning at Anakin, who defended himself with effort. Obi-Wan tried to distract the Emperor, who could now only use one arm, with a charge, but was violently repelled. At that moment, Yoda leaped between the two, absorbing the lightning with both hands. "Enough of the end. Now it is," he shouted. The little master concentrated all his remaining vital energy and threw Palpatine against the Senate columns. The impact shattered the floor, but Yoda fell exhausted. Anakin ran to him, but Yoda only whispered, "Do What must be done? Silently, Anakin and Obi-Wan looked at each other. In a synchronized movement, they advanced against Sidious, who was staggering to his feet. Anakin used the Force to pull the debris and impede the Emperor's movements. Obi-Wan spun his saber and threw it as a distraction. When Sidious raised his hand to repel the blow, Anakin jumped on him, pinning the Sith's arms with his own body weight. Obi-Wan appeared from behind, saber in hand. The two shouted. A single movement. The blade crossed Sidious's neck. The Emperor's head fell silently to the floor. The darkness had been cut. When Palpatine's body fell, a deep silence spread through the Senate. The remaining guards retreated. The dark energy that permeated Coruscant's heart began to weaken. Outside, Imperial cruisers began to surrender. Several planets sent congratulatory transmissions. Within days, the news spread. The Empire had lost its supreme leader. Hope was reborn in every corner of the galaxy. The Republic was restored not as it was, but as it could be. The surviving Jedi decided to found a new order, smaller, more balanced, based on guided by ancient and updated teachings. Obi-Wan took on the role of political and spiritual mentor. The Knights dispersed to help rebuild planets. Bail Organa became a central figure in the new Senate, guiding institutional restoration with firmness and ethics. The era of darkness was coming to an end, but vigilance would never be forgotten. Anakin Skywalker disappeared from public records. To the people, he was an anonymous hero of the rebellion. To the Jedi, a soul in recovery. To Padme, a redeemed husband. In a cabin hidden in the forests of Naboo, Anakin lived with Padme, Luke, and Leia. He taught his children about the Force, about choices, about mistakes and redemption. No statue was erected for him. No titles were restored. But every gesture with his children, every whispered lesson, was a brick in the rebuilding of his soul. For the first time, he lived not as the chosen one, but as a father. On the porch one night, Anakin watched Luke play with Leia, both laughing and running under the starlight. Padme approached, holding his hand. "They will never know war." Anakin smiled, his eyes brimming with tears. "And that is enough." In the sky above, a new era was dawning. The galaxy, marked by pain and shadows, finally breathed hope. And in the heart of the Force, a cycle had come to an end, not with destruction, but with love.